So tonight we are honored to have two of our alumni speak who have interesting experiences in their postgraduate years and are in the middle of them, and also who give a lot to the college. So tonight our speakers are Niall O'Donnell and James Bergida. Both of them are alumni of the college. Niall graduated in 2003 with a degree in English and went on to study institutional communication at the Pontifical College of the Holy Cross in Rome, Italy. And he's now our Director of Marketing and Creative Services at Christendom, doing his own kind of philosophy by having everyone explain to him very poorly what they are looking for, and then he just brings it into reality. So he's a great sub-creator in his own right. And then James Bergida is a 2009 philosophy major who, after attending Christendom, among other adventures, attended the Academy Vivarum Novum Latin School in Rome, and then went on to pursue, and is still pursuing, his doctorate in philosophy at Blackfriars Hall at University of Oxford in the UK. So both of them are going to tell us a little bit about their experiences tonight, how they get to graduate school, why it's a good experience, and maybe it's something you should think about doing. So let's welcome our speakers.
As you've probably figured out, I am not Niall, so thanks everyone for coming. I'd like to thank especially Ms. Harmon and Dr. Kelly for their kind invitation, and also a big thank you to everyone who set up and serving drinks today. I know it's a big job. I actually was an events coordinator until about a week ago, so I know what that is like. So I've been studying in Oxford now for about 3.5 years. And as you can tell, I still do not have an English accent, and I'm trying not to get one. And there are many reasons for that, but I'll leave that to Q&A. Now, the graduate body is very diverse by nationalities in Oxford. Over the course of my studies there so far, my housemates have been from about 10 countries, and from every continent except North America. I've been the only American the whole time. But there actually are quite a few Americans in Oxford, which was actually quite a surprise to me. After British students, I think actually Americans make up the largest section of the student body. So it is very multinational, and there are also many Germans and quite a few Chinese students as well. And I've actually found this to be especially true in the Catholic community. I'm not quite sure why. Maybe there's some affection for Tolkien or something that brings Catholics over the pond. But there is a very vibrant Catholic community, even though the university itself is not Catholic, and Anglicanism is everywhere. Most of the chapels are Anglican, as well as the university's own church. There is a great Catholic chaplaincy in Oxford with a great Newman Society where there's talks and social events. There's a pro-life club. The Knights of Malta are very involved in the community doing corporal works of mercy, especially amongst the homeless that are throughout the city. So there's very much decadence actually in the city, at the same time quite a bit of poverty. So it's been an interesting contrast. And the Catholic Church has, I think, played a huge role in alleviating some of that suffering. Other Catholic things I found there are the oratory. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. The liturgy there is very similar in many ways to Christendom. I've sometimes said, though, we still have a better choir here. So, also, besides these things, another great Catholic presence is actually in the administration of the university itself. The top two people, the chancellor and the vice chancellor at the moment, are both Catholic, as well as the dean of the business school. So there is this great Catholic presence also in the colleges, which I'll talk about in a moment. There's a St. Benet's Hall run by the Benedictines, Campion Hall run by the Jesuits, and Blackfriars Hall, which is my college, run by the Dominicans. So in Oxford, there's this collegiate system, which is a little bit odd, and I like to describe it as somewhat like a federal system, where the colleges are like states and the university is like the federal government. So there are 38 colleges and 6 permanent private halls. The main difference between the two is the permanent private halls are usually run by some religious organization. So a Catholic order, the Baptists have a college, and there's a couple of seminaries as well, whereas the others are ruled, as it were, by their fellows, who are academics connected to the college. So actually, it's a large-ish university, 22,000 students, but because of these small little pockets, you feel like it feels somewhat like a smaller communities that you're able to hold on to. So it is many ways like Christendom in that, I found. Blackfriars is even smaller. It probably has like 40 students in the hall itself and maybe 40 seminarians. So it's still a very close and tight-knit community. So I get asked a lot, so what is graduate study like in this sort of bizarre setting and being in England? Sometimes I like to describe it as living in an academic Disneyland. There are beautiful buildings, exceptional libraries. Actually, all the books in the UK that are published there have to be sent to Oxford, so it's a bit like having the Library of Congress at your fingertips. But when I'm feeling less romantic about it all, I usually describe the experience of studying there as being in a pressure cooker. But most often, I paraphrase one of my former colleagues who astutely observed that Oxford demands very little of its graduate students, but it expects a lot. It's this combination of modest demands and high expectations that makes Oxford, for me, a fascinating and rewarding place to pursue graduate study. Now, I'm going to use this lens of modest demands and high expectations to describe my Oxford experience. Now, I wouldn't stretch that observation too far, but you'll see to what degree this description fits. So what do I mean by modest demands? Consider for a moment all the hurdles of an undergraduate education here at Christendom. When you stop to think about it, it actually demands quite a lot of you. Over the course of academic year, you have 30-some weeks of classes, each week 12 or 15 hours in the classroom. And then if you just think about assessments, let's see, there are essays, more than I can remember and don't want to remember. There are quizzes, pop quizzes, exams, midterms, finals, and perhaps even some extra credit. Actually, some of my favorite extra credit came in Dr. Townsend's astronomy course, where I used to write poems about stars. Does he even allow that anymore? And then when you're a senior, I was just talking to one a moment ago, you have that thesis where hopefully you get a chance to spend some time working on some genuinely original scholarship. It's a lot of demands, week to week, over the course of 4 years. At least that's what I found it to be. Now, graduate school in Oxford is very different from this, in that it demands its students, at least its graduate students, in a way far less. And by the way, in case I slip into it, graduate students in Oxford are called postgraduate students, and it's called postgraduate studies or just postgraduate. So just in case I slip into Oxford lingo, you are now warned. So when I was still a master's student, I had, in a typical week, only, 1.5 hour seminar. It was every week or every 2 weeks. And then I had a 1 hour tutorial, one-on-one with my supervisor. And that was only every week or two, for which I prepared a short essay to discuss with him. And any grades I happened to receive really didn't actually count. They were just to give me an idea of how I was doing. So actually, in the typical week, I probably had only 3 or 4 contact hours that were actually required. And then assessments themselves weren't actually that numerous. So over the course of 2 years, these were my assessments. I had 3 essays, about 15 pages each. I had a dissertation that was maybe slightly longer than what I wrote here for my dissertation. And I had 2 3-hour written exams and then an oral exam. And that was it over 2 years. So it doesn't really seem like that much. Now, as a doctoral student, it's actually been even fewer demands. All that was required of me is to attend a seminar every week, every other week even. And actually, that's not even that strict because I'm here and I'm actually missing that, so thank you. And then to write a thesis of no more than 100,000 words. Now, that is about 400 pages, Times New Roman double-spaced. But the writing, even though that sounds like a lot, over the course of 3 or 4 years, it really is doable, especially since doctoral students in Oxford don't actually have to teach, even though they can teach, but it's not a requirement in any way. And then as far as assessments go, I have 3 reviews of this over 3 or 4 years, and that's it. The first one was called Transfer of Status, which involves the defense of the thesis proposal and an interview with 2 assessors, neither of whom are one's supervisor. A relatively short writing sample is also assessed for good measure. But the reason it's called Transfer of Status is because when you begin, you're a probationary research student, or a PRS, and then you transfer from that to full doctoral status. So that's why the naming. And it typically happens at the end of your first year, so you basically have a year to figure out what you're doing. After about another year or 2, you have what's called confirmation of status, which again, it means a submission of a bit of writing, a little bit longer this time. But at that point, you really do need to know what you're actually talking about. And once again, you meet with 2 assessors, they go over it, make sure it's okay, and you continue on. And then finally, the final assessment comes after when you're all finished and you submit the full thesis. And then you have 2 what are called examiners. Once again, they aren't your supervisor. So your supervisor the whole time has been preparing you for an examination that's going to come from someone else by the university itself. And so one of these examiners is from the university, is an academic in the house, and the other one is from another university. That way you have someone who perhaps is a little bit familiar with your work, perhaps was one of your assessors, but then you have someone who's seeing it for the first time and can make sure it makes sense. And then you're done. Once you finish that and they're okay with it, and you fix any corrections that they advise you to work with. So since these demands for its graduate students seem rather small, it might seem that Oxford really is a lousy educator. But that's where the high expectations come into play. There is a sense that a lot is expected of you, but it's not always easy to pinpoint what that is. I thought about it a bit in preparing for this, and I thought perhaps it's the knowledge that you stroll down the same walks as C.S. Lewis, live on the same streets as Dorothy Sayers once did, study in the same libraries as Cardinal Newman, run at the same track as Roger Bannister, pray in the same churches as Tolkien. You know, there's portraits of these people in many of the dining halls of the colleges. There's also the world-class scholars that you see in seminars, and perhaps even your supervisor is one of those. I mean, a couple of academics you're probably familiar with their books would be John Finnis and Roger Scruton, who's actually at Blackfriars, I'm proud to say. Then there's also your fellow students. You see them in the university libraries feverishly studying from sometimes the early mornings until closing. There's one of my friends in particular who just her story was compelling. You felt like I need to also work hard. She was a world-class show horse rider. She was top 5% at Harvard. She won a full ride to Oxford. And while she was working on her master's, she wrote a book that was accepted for publication. So these are your classmates, and so you feel like you need to live up to the standards they set. More substantially, though, are just the assessments. Even though they are few, they are very rigorous. And because they are few, you really have few mistakes you can make if you're going to do well and even pass. And the grading is quite hard. I have heard of students who thought they were just doing fine because their supervisor said nothing, and then when an assessment came along, they did poorly or even failed. So the Oxford system can have its drawbacks. There's plenty of rope to hang yourself with, I'm afraid. Let me, though, conclude with a little bit of encouragement. I think the real hard the real hard part is a question of motivation. If you're self-motivated, Oxford can be a very rewarding experience. It's a lot of hard work, a lot of study by yourself, and few requirements, to drive you on. But I found that the freedom that Oxford provides is a freedom to excel whenever you put in the work. I have also found it to be a place to grow in my faith. Christendom, although it was very different from Oxford, prepared me for study there by both through the rigorous work, especially in academic writing. I guess I didn't realize how important that was for doing graduate school while I was here, but I'm very grateful for that. Even little things like footnotes. It's amazing how people don't know how to actually do a footnote at Oxford. So you should love Turabian. It actually is important. You're welcome.
Thank you.
But also through this spiritual and theological formation. It's amazing how many students who are even Catholic who actually find it very difficult working at Oxford in a very secular environment, who, though they love their faith, actually don't know how to articulate it. And I think that's something that Christendom's provided for me, and it has made all the difference in the world. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Niall.
All right, guys. Colleen, thanks for inviting me here. It's great to be with y'all. So, a little bit about myself. Well, I was raised in Virginia. I was born in California, and I had a hard time getting rid of those California roots. I clung to them for some weird reason. I think it's because I thought it was too cool for Virginia for a long time. Even when we came to Christendom, I played for the West, and I still root for them, oddly enough. But after I graduated Christendom, I finally realized that I was Virginian, and I accepted it. I started listening to country music. And now the only thing left of California is rooting for the Dodgers. When I'm not rooting, when baseball season is not in session, I'm cheering on the Redskins and rooting against the Patriots, and keeping up on the latest Star Wars and Marvel news. So if any of you guys like to talk about those kind of things, come by Zach and I's office. We love chatting about those things. So as Colleen said, I majored in English language literature here, and it was during my senior year that I started to think concretely about what I wanted to do. Coming in as a freshman, I wanted to major in philosophy and be a psychiatrist. And by my senior year, I was majoring in English and had no desire to go into psychiatry. So thank you, liberal arts education. And I was given some good advice when I was going to do my thesis. I was told, do something you love, because you're going to be with it a long time. And then I was given the same advice when I was looking at careers. Do something that you love, because that's the only way you're going to be happy. So I started looking around things that I loved, and they were hobbies mostly. Writing poetry, writing short stories, making fake radio shows with my friends, making movies with my brothers. And essentially what I realized that boiled down to was communications. If you step back and look at these seemingly meaningless hobbies, there's actually a practical application, a way to express that kind of technical/creative fulfillment that I was seeking. And to go deeper than that, I felt that as a child, I had been duped by the world. I had kind of bought into the secular salesmanship of everything looked better. They told you if you're totally free from morals and religion, you're going to be happy, right? And it was sold in music, it was sold in movies, and it looked good. It looked better. And growing up, the church's salesmanship, it never looked good to me. And so I was like, you know what? There's a problem in the world. The good guys always look silly, and the bad guys look good. And so I wanted to help make the good guys look good. Enter Santa Croce. For those of you who haven't heard of Santa Croce, it is part of the pontifical school system. And what that means is, if I could borrow an analogy from Mr. Bergida, the pontifical school system is kind of like the federal government, and then they all have little schools underneath them, kind of like states. They are usually, if not directly under the Holy See, they're run by some order of the church. So, for example, the Angelicum in Rome is run by the Dominicans. The Lateran in Rome is run by the Jesuits, and the Santa Croce is run by Opus Dei. Now, Santa Croce is unique in the sense that it had this communications program that I was interested in. Most pontifical schools specialize in philosophy, theology, or canon law. That's not always the case. They've started to expand a little bit, but in general, you're always going to find theology, philosophy, and canon law at a pontifical school. So what Santa Croce set out to do, they were one of the first schools to kind of expand that, what they were offering. They wanted to train future leaders for the church who could understand media, could communicate with the media, and present the truths of the church in a digestible and attractive way, which we still struggle with today. I'm sure you're aware of. It's a constant struggle, but I think we've come a long way in the last 15 to 20 years. So why Santa Croce for me? One, it was the field I wanted to go into, communications. Two, the location was ideal for me. It was in Rome. I had visited Rome. They did not have the junior semester when I was at Christendom, but I knew I wanted to go back there and live there for a short time. And additionally, the price was right. And so I'll just touch on those three things. So it was what I wanted. The degree itself, the course study, I took courses in ethics, media relations, analysis, public speaking, desktop publishing, documentary and filmmaking, radio production, crisis communications, and a broad gamut from the world of social communications. The program typically is a 5-year program. But since the school and the professors there are familiar with Christendom College, I was able to condense the first 3 years of that program into 1 year, and then so I was able to graduate in 2 years with a license. And the license is basically, it's the equivalent of a master's, essentially, in the pontifical school system. I have other friends that were able to do it in 2.5. They're Roman and Italian, so of course they're willing to negotiate. You can point out certain coursework that you've done in the past that could kind of make up for certain courses and things like that. But while I was at Santa Croce, I found that I excelled there, thanks to my liberal arts background. I found myself ahead of the curve when it came to writing assignments, especially expressing the truths of the church in front of the camera, engaging media. It was all a huge asset to me. So very, very thankful for that. At the end of the course study at Santa Croce, you have the chance to do a thesis, a practical or a written one. And having just done 4 years of Christendom and done my thesis there, I opted for the practical course, jumped at that opportunity, and I was able to do a documentary on students from Christendom, because they had started the Rome program there. Students at Christendom went on pilgrimage to Assisi, so I did a little documentary on them. You can actually find it on YouTube if you want to. It's called The Path to Assisi. There's no reference to Christendom in it, so don't bother searching Christendom, but if you look for Path to Assisi. My professors loved it. They thought it was great. I basically followed students and interviewed them on their spiritual journey through Assisi. And ultimately, my goal was to create something that Christendom could actually use. Now, it didn't work out because this particular group of students loved to smoke. They were constantly smoking. And so I had all this footage, and there'd be like someone in the background, or it was always there. It broke my heart, and I was worried. I was like, what am I going to do? I'm running out of footage. But then I came to the conclusion, well, I was like, well, my professors are European. They're probably not going to care. So I put the footage in there anyways, and they loved it. So that all worked out. Second reason, the location of Rome. Half the education is just being there in Rome. As I'm sure many of you guys who have done the semester in Rome, just being there at the heart of the church, you learn so much about just the way she thinks and works. Honestly, like you almost learn to breathe with her. I was there for the death of John Paul II and the election of Benedict XVI, which was a fantastic experience as a communications student. we were able to get in front of media cameras, do interviews, and cover the event, assist with that. I was able to, through connections with the university, do a brief internship with Fox News, which the reporter there, he ended up becoming the press secretary for the Vatican, Greg Burke. He was fantastic, nicest guy, loved working with him. His supervisor, though, was horrible. I mean, it was like the classic, you've seen those movies where you walk on the set of like a Hollywood production and there's this harpy there, is like, who is this guy? What is he doing here? Why is he here? That's what it was. And so kind of encountering that, coupled with the 24/7 being on call nature of it, I learned that I did not want to go into the news business and news journalism. But it was a good experience nonetheless, showing me that. Also from a purely aesthetic perspective, Rome's a beautiful place. It's a great place to live. Even though the craziness of the city life could get to this country bumpkin, there's plenty of beautiful parks to get out and escape and put your feet on grass. Third reason, the price. For those of you who are cash-strapped, the pontifical school system is affordable. It varies depending on what you're going to study, but it ranges from about $1,500 to about $3,000 a semester. That's it. Now, what you have to take into consideration, though, is your cost of living. But that being said, that's a great price for higher education, like postgraduate work. How it worked for me was I was able to score an internship with a local with think tank that had opened an office there, the Acton Institute. And they were looking for someone, a recent grad who's tech savvy, that could help out with office mailings and brochures and things like that. So I was able to work there, and in turn they gave me a place to live. It was kind of like I'd struck gold. So I wouldn't expect that to happen to you. So I would just share that I had friends there that did make it work. Some lived in convents, a little bit outside the city. There's nuns that basically rent rooms at very affordable prices. And I was the spoiled brat of my bunch because my flat was actually in the heart of Rome, so it was kind of focal point. A lot of people would come and want to stay there, hang out there, and envied me. But I spoke to a friend recently who said, as my time in Rome evolved, I kind of I wanted that central location, but I found that I liked getting out of the city. Living in the suburbs was a quiet escape from the craziness, and it kind of became a comforting place. And I felt like I got to know Rome off the beaten path, out of the touristy area. So even if you don't land the place in the heart and the center of it all, there's still much beauty and positive things that you can experience through living outside the city. Even as far as Santa Marinella. Did any of you who went to Rome ever go to Santa Marinella, the sea town? Yeah. So there's a big American community out there. A lot of them are expats or people who go into the pontifical school system. So they'll live in flats out there, and that's another affordable way to make it work. My next bit, I'm just going to conclude with this, is, is it right for you? So you might like the idea of living in Rome. It might be a dream of yours. Maybe you just want to do graduate school. But the questions I think you should ask if you're seriously considering doing the pontifical school system in Rome, whether it's Santa Croce or the Angelicum, is, do I want to work for the church in some capacity? Not necessarily directly, but in some capacity, whether it's through educational apostolate or doing something like communications or journalism. But that's what you need to ask yourself, because ultimately a pontifical degree is not going to carry the same weight as, say, an Oxford degree is in the secular world. So that's something you should be aware of. So you definitely want to be a person who really wants to work in some form of apostolate if you're going to make that dive. Now, I'm not saying that limits you, cuts you off. That's not the case at all. I have some colleagues who went to Santa Croce that are doing well, working in secular fields and thriving. But it's not going to open the door to the field of communications in like the business world that you might think it would. And it's really not really geared towards that either. Santa Croce's program really is focusing on preparing people to be spokespeople for the church. With that, I would also add that you should have a spirit of adventure, because living in Rome for 3 or 2 years, whatever it might be, it can be intense, and you will have adventures, so you got to be prepared for that. I have some materials on Santa Croce if you guys want to take a look at it. Oh, and one big thing I totally forgot. I'll conclude with this. A lot of the majority of the classes are in Italian. And I wasn't afraid of that going in. I don't know why I wasn't afraid of it, but I just had this confidence that, I'll figure it out. Buonasera, buongiorno, I'll figure it out. And the good news was, much like Oxford, Santa Croce is very international. So you had students from the Ivory Coast, Kenya, Brazil, Mexico, and India. You're all there, and that first year you're all learning Italian together, and the professors know it. So they do take it kind of slow, and you get to develop the ear for it. And then you start to learn little tricks of how to translate things in your head. And once you get that kind of basics down, and it's not as hard as it sounds. It's very doable. I'm not a brainiac person, and if I can handle it, I'm sure any of you guys could. But thank you.